Denis Johnson's writing is like a feral greased pig. I always feel like when I get a handle on what he's trying to get across, it slips out of my hands and runs into the woods. Better than food. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for stopping by. Get that coffee if you got it. Lukewarm, but still delicious. How are you? Good to see you. Today is a short novel, Jesus' Son, by the American author, poet, and playwright Denis Johnson, published in 1992. Very short book, but packs a lot of punch. In the past, I reviewed Johnson's posthumous book, The Largesse of the Sea Maiden, and another one called Train Dreams for patrons on Patreon, link below. I really enjoyed that one. I believe this is his most well-known, considered his most famous book. It's a collection of 11 surreal short stories or vignettes, moments of a life, out of chronological order, all from the first-person point of view of a recovering heroin addict and alcoholic named Fuckhead. At least that's the only name we know him by. That's his nickname, by the way. Apparently back in the day, somebody nicknamed Johnson Fuckhead. It's a disordered narrative, to say the least. These moments of his life are collected in a way that tells his story perhaps better than if it were linear. It seems to take place in several different parts of the country, and that's no surprise, as Johnson himself has been all over. And I believe Johnson has said this is like the book that he identifies with the most. All of the events in the story either happened to Johnson himself, or to someone he knew, or a friend of a friend or something. People he's known throughout his life. The car crash, I know, at the very beginning of the book was a real car crash, and I have an interesting article on that link below. The title of the book comes from the song Heroin by the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. When I'm rushing on my run, and I feel just like Jesus' son. Terrific song, essential listening. One signature of Denis Johnson's writing, I've gathered by now, is the uncertainness of his subjects and stories. Never can I recall a moment of conviction, like decisive conviction in his writings or characters. They're always perpetually unmoored. And from what I've gathered, that's how he felt generally in life as well, it seems. He was an alcoholic and a heroin addict in the 70s. He kicked it eventually, and then started publishing novels and a variety of writings. So he was a success story, but yeah, unfortunately he passed away in 2017. Rest in peace. It's almost as if he possesses this kind of decision anxiety of making a statement or positing a conviction, because the way in which life has revealed itself to him is as something ever-shifting, gray, both dark and light, and generally, I don't know, weird, dreamlike, surreal, but funny, which is what this book is like. I'm basically just describing the book now. There's this constant barrage of randomness throughout. I don't know if Johnson invited more of it upon himself through his lifestyle and his actions, but it seems like he had quite a hell of a life, and his books reflect that. So we start off the narrative with the story Car Crash While Hitchhiking, which finds our protagonist, Fuckhead, hitching a ride with a family that somehow he knows is going to crash. I assume it's the drugs, at least, it's never explained, but he gets in anyways. Sure enough, they do. The result is simultaneously horrifying, humorous, and moving. There's a kind of savage, dark comedy to the character's honest statements, entwined with a sometimes heartbreaking empathy for down-and-out people suffering at the hands of external forces. Who knows what, right? And then sometimes it gets all confused, these thoughts of the character, or these actions, and wrapped up in this maelstrom of both normal and inappropriate thoughts or actions in a way I've never seen written exactly, but which reflect how the mind works. It can go from very light to very dark in a second. A police officer has just taken Fuckhead from the crash scene to the hospital, and as soon as they reach the emergency room, it comes over the cop's radio in the car that Fuckhead's riding in as well, that the driver in the other car has died, a man. And while he's getting checked out in the hospital to make sure he's okay, Fuckhead encounters this man's wife. There's nothing wrong with me. Down the hall came the wife. She was glorious, burning. She didn't know yet that her husband was dead. We knew. That's what gave her such power over us. The doctor took her into a room with a desk at the end of the hall, and from under the closed door a slab of brilliance radiated, as if, by some stupendous process, diamonds were being incinerated in there. What a pair of lungs! She shrieked as I imagined an eagle would shriek. It felt wonderful to be alive, to hear it. I've gone looking for that feeling everywhere. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm surprised to let those words out. But it's always been my tendency to lie to doctors, as if good health consisted only of the ability to fool them. So, he's juxtaposing these truly dark, devastating moments with these splashes of kind of banal comedy. And that's kind of what the human experience is like, you know? In moments of total and utter disaster, there's these kind of like weird moments of just like humor, which is odd. Not all the time, of course, but... And it's often really bizarre and confusing and doesn't seem to make any sense. That's life in a nutshell, basically, and that's the life that Denis Johnson is writing about. Another memorable story is Emergency, which is a little less dark, but still pretty dark. Another story that takes place in an emergency room, where we find Fuckhead working as an orderly in an ER in the early 70s. And Fuckhead has taken a lot of pills with his co-worker Georgie one night. Georgie steals pills from the place. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night when they're working high as fuck, this man walks into the emergency room with a hunting knife sticking out of his face. Like, it's been plunged into his head up to the handle at that space in the socket right there, right next to the eye. So not through the eye, but like it hit right there. And his wife stabbed him while he was asleep. And he just calmly walks up and says, you know, I think I need some help, or something to that effect, paraphrasing. And the nurse at the desk is like totally freaked out. And these guys are high and they have no idea what the hell to do. Nobody has any clue what to do. They're getting on the phone trying to find like the best eye man, the best gas man, like anesthesiologist and so on. And of course it's absurd. It's completely absurd. Obviously this is terrible, but it's very funny, as the man doesn't seem to be in much pain, while everybody around him is just collapsing under the pressure of just what to do, exactly. For, as a whole, being the story of an addict, you know, a recovering addict, there's very little drug use in the book that I can remember, at least. And I don't think what's there is really romanticized. What's described is kind of painful. Like in the beginning, he describes some pills that this salesman gave to him. The traveling salesman had fed me pills that made the linings of my veins feel scraped out. For the most part, there's nothing romanticized about substances in Denis Johnson's work, that I can recall at least, save for a moment in this book where he's very grateful for a drink. The book always suggests that it's kind of taking place during the aftermath, you know, of drug use or alcohol. The honeymoon period definitely seems to be over. It's also kind of a quasi-mystical journey towards what some people might call salvation, but we may also just call stability, really. Fuckhead never gets there, of course, not that we know of at least. And the result is kind of reminiscent of the next line in the song Heroin, you know, and I guess I just don't know, and I guess I just don't know, right? That's the general thing I get from Johnson and his work. He really just doesn't know. He's trying to figure it out and he sees the value of writing, but he has successfully conveyed the dynamic shifting shape of life that is ultimately and always totally confusing. That's the general thing I get from Johnson, you know, regarding God and life. Ultimately, honestly, he has no idea. He, like his character, has no idea. But he does know how to capture that feeling in his stories, in his work. I haven't read his poetry or his plays. I'd be interested to check those out. There are two things very striking and noticeable in the writing of Jesus' Son. First, the element of surprise, which Johnson employs at like every appropriate opportunity. Second, the poetic nature of his brief sentences, which makes you feel you've read something much longer than you actually have. He's situated specific words together that unlock many things with the mind. It's like he's writing poetry in the form of prose fiction. It didn't always work for me, but more often than not it did. And many of his stories are memorable. You're gonna remember a lot of images from this book. I mean, it's difficult to forget some of them. There's a film adaptation of Jesus' Son, actually, which I haven't seen, but that had the guy who was stabbed with a knife. Johnson played him in the film. Pretty funny. And I think Jack Black was Georgie, the orderly who was stealing drugs. The entire book's style seems predicated on Johnson setting you up for something expected, and then pulling the rug out from under your feet over and over again. Which feels formulaic and by the end just feels like some kind of big joke. Which is actually what a lot of people feel probably at the end of their life. So, you know, perhaps real life is often like that. Johnson's style reminds me of Raymond Carver's, whom he actually studied under at the Iowa Writers' Workshop at the University of Iowa. But he's more sentimental and humorous. Carver is just like glacial. He's like so cold and almost just not even present as an author. Sometimes it kind of feels like stand-up comedy from a man who was born a young, tragic poet genius, who picked up some bad habits and then later became a born-again, recovering alcoholic/heroin addict. Humorous stories that sometimes deviate into depravity, desperation, disaster, or degradation. It's really a book I have to be in the mood for, right? And this time, I wasn't. But I still recognize that it's a great book. It's dreamy. It's like, you know, kind of like Train Dreams was very surreal and dreamlike. This one is too. You can never quite get a handle of what's going on, and neither can Fuckhead because he's often high or whatever, in a state of total confusion. Denis Johnson's writing is like a feral greased pig. I always feel like when I get a handle on what he's trying to get across, it slips out of my hands and runs into the woods. He's a previous addict himself with a self-aware, self-deprecating sense of good-natured humor. But he's also not beholden to giving a fuck, if you know what I mean. He's a trickster, right? He'll set you up for one thing and then he'll violently shift the tone in a way that's very enjoyable as a reader at first, but jarring and eventually kind of, again, formulaic, and it's like, okay, yeah, right. Haha, right? He's not necessarily lying when he delivers a line of sincerity through the mouth of a character, but one will quickly realize that the character is unpredictable and is probably going to change their mind and say or do something unexpected, contradictory, repulsive, or extraordinary. But in this manner, Johnson has created a pretty accurate definition, in my opinion, of what it means to be human. A person, and one on drugs, to be an addict, or a recovering addict, or somewhere in between. The result of everything in the story is disorder and turmoil. It's chaos, it's madness, havoc, disarray, disruption, pandemonium. It's a shit show, right? Life is a shit show. It's a fucking dumpster fire. But it's kind of funny, and there's some uplifting moments shared with your fellow man, who is also in the midst of experiencing everything as distress. The result is chaos, which is to say that, perhaps being a human is a Sisyphean treadmill of chaos, right? With an infinite number of attempts to quell the desire to burn it all down and obliterate one's consciousness, risk it all, go out of one's mind, find peace, lose peace, fall down, get back up, and so on, ad infinitum, right? There are reasons why this is so difficult for Fuckhead. The novel suggests that it had something to do with his mother, who we can gather didn't do a great job of raising him. His father seemed abusive, probably absent, probably for the better. So Fuckhead's life was disorder from the get-go, right? But as Susanna Honeywell said for the New York Times in her review of Jesus' Son, link below, Carl Jung said that inside of every alcoholic there's a seeker who got on the wrong track. I really like Susanna Honeywell. Honeywell, I'm not sure how you pronounce her name. She passed away a few years ago in 2019, I think. But she did, she had some great stuff. She was a literary critic, and she did a magnificent interview with Michel Houellebecq for the Paris Review. It's just like this legendary interview that I refer back to frequently, so it was really cool to see that she had written about this book. Pressed to define what makes Denis Johnson so unique is not a really easy task for me. He has this kind of mainstream appeal, but he's also this really bizarre hodgepodge of elements, totally unto himself and always unfinished. He's always this. Denis Johnson was like witnessing a process, the process of being a human being in action, in its dynamic action, in its, in life, right? He was truly, quite literally too, when he was growing up, all over the place. He'd be indefinable if he weren't so recognizable when reading him, you know what I mean? But the thing that you're recognizing is a poetic style not so easily understood or articulated. That's why I think this book is great. He's really got his own voice. There is a Denis Johnson style. It's distinct and recognizable, but it's kind of off. I don't know how else to describe it. It's kind of weird. He can go from kind of stupid, innocent, clumsy, endearing to ultra dark, disturbing confessional in a second. I thought, and I think I actually started writing it in this review, that I thought that it was completely ADHD. And I started writing that in this review, and then I scratched it. I took it out because I was insecure. And then I found this quote from an article in the LA Times about Johnson by David Ulin. Johnson agreed to an email exchange with the LA Times, and he said, "I suppose if I were in school today," he acknowledges, "I'd be diagnosed as attention deficient and dosed with speed. I get bored quickly and try another style, another genre, another form. To me, the writing is all one thing. Or maybe I should say it's all nothing. The truth is, I just write sentences." Exactly. That's him, right? But in that kind of ADHD style, in that kind of boredom, there is a voice, a distinct voice that does emerge. Clearly. The thing is, it's like, if you spot it in the crowd, if you spot him in the crowd of authors, he can disappear really quickly and it can sound like somebody else, right? And it's kind of this, but then you come back and you can find his face again, but then he's kind of like, it's almost like a mask he's wearing, right? It's really weird. It's highly intelligent writing about hitting and going past rock bottom and coming back up, living through it and coming back up. Have you ever been so embarrassed you've ceased to be embarrassed? I have. I once threw up all over myself in a cab. And I think this was a radio cab back in Portland when they actually still had, the Uber was like coming around, but it still wasn't a thing. So this would have been like 2000. I was early 20s. It must have been 2012. I was hungover after a party and I was riding in the cab with my girlfriend at the time. I'm 6'4", but I'm a lightweight. I always have been. Could never drink. Could never really drink, which certainly has its pros. Don't get me wrong. I was hungover recently off of 3 glasses of wine. It was absolutely pathetic. Anyways, got in the cab, threw up halfway home. Anyways, it was so pathetic and chaotic and outrageously humiliating. I'll spare you the details, but I was wearing a suit and it was just done for. But you know, we pulled over in this hotel parking lot and the cab driver is so pissed and he's like smoking the cigarette. And I get out just like drenched in vomit. And I was so embarrassed that I suddenly just stopped being embarrassed. It was amazing. It was like something transcended. As though I just switched into problem-solving mode and I was like, hey, I'm really sorry, but what's done is done and I gotta take care of this. I gotta get home, clean up, go on with my life. It was almost like a survival mechanism, right? So I gave the driver a big tip, to the best of my abilities in my 20s, and I got home. He actually seemed fine after that. I shudder to think what the guy must go through on a weekly basis. But anyways, the pragmatism of Johnson's characters reminded me of that. People who have completely lost their dignity through fucking up, whether it's their own fault or others, or both, but are still human, humbled, wiser in a way. You do get that from big mistakes, from fucking up big time. You know more than others about your own propensity for foolishness. And if you live through it, that is really valuable information, I gotta say. Not that it's an excuse to go and fuck your shit up. You shouldn't. And it's far better and you're gonna be far more well off in life if you don't. But you definitely get something from fucking up big time, whether that's financially or in a relationship or, you know, what, I mean, take your pick. There's an endless amount of ways to fuck up big in life, right? But if you live through it and you pick yourself back up, yeah, you know something that the people who haven't experienced that do not, for sure. So, it's an education of the most painful variety, but it is an education and a very valuable one. It's kind of priceless. This is basically what being a human being is, to the best of my knowledge. I mean, it's basically fucking up big time, dusting yourself off, then getting back up and doing it all over again. It's really depressing. And then by the end of your life, you're like sitting there on your deathbed like, what the fuck was that? So Johnson's characters always have this nature about them, right? People who are not successful by any stretch of the imagination, but in certain ways are wiser than those who are. This is kind of the thing that, like, you know, Christianity really lends itself to, like people who are so down and out, as my wife was talking about. You know, Jesus is such a compassionate figure. I mean, so empathetic and so forgiving. You know, it's no wonder that addicts, you know, truly, people who have truly hit rock bottom would flock to something like that, to a kind of, not only a figure of empathy, but also a system of empathy. Christianity is a very sophisticated system. Very, very sophisticated system. You know, a religion, of course, but and a collection of very interesting ideas and many, many things. Whatever it is to you, however much or not it means to you, I think it's indisputable that it is a very impressive safety support system for a culture, as all religions are, the major religions, you know. So it's interesting to think about that when reading this book, right? I'm reading the Bible right now, and I'm just in Exodus, but I mean, it's great stuff, and it's going to take forever at my glacial rate, but I can't wait to get to you know, the New Testament. But look, it's a very sophisticated system for building and preserving a culture. So Johnson always seemed to be, and there's an article I've linked to below about God in Denis Johnson's writings. You know, he's never explicit. He shies away from that question. You know, he prefers to completely ignore anybody asking him about that. But he clearly has some sort of there's some sort of Christian element at play in his work, right? Which is like indisputable. There's a lot going on there, and it's worth looking into, in my opinion. So if you're interested, check out that article by Aaron Thier on LitHub below, Looking for God in the Writing of Denis Johnson. Yeah. So better than food? We could say yes, but I have my reservations. This is what I dislike about it. Much like Johnson's record of living in a bunch of places throughout his life, the book is so short and all over the place that it never gets a handle on a subject to truly discover something, and then seems kind of superficial because of it. It seems kind of surface level, like it can go deep, but it can only go so deep, right? And then it kind of like fucks off. You know, it kind of like pulls back. It never gets at what it's aiming at. To truly discover something, to truly make a discovery, or to discover something, or say something, to say something concrete, to have conviction in what it's saying. It never arrives at its destination. He never arrives, right? Which is kind of like the point of Johnson, if like that hasn't become clear already. But that's irritating to me because I think that a work of art should get somewhere, even if where that is unsatisfying. It presents a whole bunch of dark and moving and humorous situations, but it never comes to any conclusions. I prefer stories wherein the author has sat down and tried to work something out, even if it's only a strong and coherent theory, which is the closest thing to solid ground any of us can stand on, because nobody really knows anything, right? And in all the books I've read by Johnson, he never seems to arrive anywhere near something of that description. But he does capture the kind of nonsensical quality of existence and the surprise of it all, right? So better than food. So you should read it. Well, if you enjoy the work of Bukowski, William S. Burroughs, Don Carpenter, and Roberto Bolaño, I suggest you check it out. There's a good talk that Pahlaniuk did with James Altucher, discussing this book and Johnson's method of continually raising the tension and then bringing it back down, only to raise it more increasingly in kind of a staggered way, contrasting light and dark, light and dark, light and dark, but it's always raising. The stripper and the comedian bit, link below. The problem with watching this video before you've read the book is that it could potentially kill the book's mystery. It did for me, especially the story about the abortion, that notorious line that he says. I think I would have gotten a lot more out of that short story in this book if I didn't know what was coming. So, I didn't want to spoil it for you. Thanks a bunch, Chuck, and whatever. It's a famous book. He can't be blamed. But yeah, again, a line that you were not expecting at all. Quite brutal. Yeah, and that's that. Cool. Coffee time. For those of you who are new, thank you very much for stopping by and watching. I take all the names of the patrons on Patreon who have donated $5 or more per video to the show, and I place their names in this mason jar. And for every review, I pull out a name, and whoever's name I pull out, I send a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. I roast coffee as a hobby, and it's delicious. So if you'd like to get in on that and help support the show, you can click on the link below, or go to patreon.com/books are better than food, and donate $5 or more per video. And if you donate $1 or more, you get access to a whole bunch of cool stuff listed below. I sincerely appreciate any and all support. Thank you. Thank you so much to all the patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Brian W. Thank you very much, Brian. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive Jesus' Son by Denis Johnson, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly, and I hope you love both. Thank you so much. Subscribe if you don't suck, and hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and always remember, bring a book wherever you go. All right, thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night. Talk to you soon. Ciao.